Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first colloquium of our spring 2024 semester for the Women, Gender, Sexuality Studies, American Studies, and Ethnic Studies departments. We're really happy that you have made time today to join us. I have a few announcements before we begin. As always, our socials are here. If you have not joined us, if you are not following us, please take a minute to do so. You can take out your phone, follow us, and then put away your phone and silence it, please. Okay, and then next week we have another event coming up. It is Coffee, Tea, and Cookies with women, gender, sexuality studies faculty, including myself, including Professor Valen. Can you stand up for us, please? Yes. And Professor Koikari. Come to chat with us, to ask us about the major, or just come to have a cookie. We don't care either way. We just want to be near you, spend time with you. So please check us out next week, Wednesday from 1 to 2 in Saunders 713. The info is also on our socials, which is another reason why you should follow us. Okay, so finally, our next colloquium, our March colloquium, is on March 8th. We will be hosting a conversation with Gina Apostol. The conversation will be led by Joyce Mariano. Stand up for us in the back, Joyce, come on. So March 8th, please put it in your Google Calendar. We'd love to see you there. Okay, so finally, I want to let you all know that we are selling books. In the back at the end of the colloquium, all proceeds will go to Middle East Children's Alliance and Maui Medics. They will be $25 each, cash and Venmo. So raise your hand, Shi. Right back there. So after the conversation, we invite you to please purchase a book. Okay, so that's enough of all the announcements. As you all know, if you've been coming for a while, our great purpose for the year for this colloquium is to build community between our 3 departments and anyone else who wants to come for these shared discussions and conversations. We thought, what better way to promote conversation than to change the format of our actual presentations to a conversation, right? So each of our departments will be represented by one of our faculty having an important engaged conversation with our guest speaker. So today, I would like to introduce Dr. Lani Teves, who is a Hawaiian feminist born and raised in Ewa Beach. She is the author of Defiant Indigeneity, which explores the spaces where Native Hawaiians perform the routines of everyday life. Her articles have appeared in American Quarterly, the American Indian Culture and Research Journal, and the International Journal of Critical Indigenous Studies. Her academic titles and accomplishments are many, including being the co-editor of Native Studies Keywords, the co-editor of Ocean Feminism's special issue of Amerasia that just came out last fall. Please check it out. And then co-editor of the forthcoming American Quarterly issue, We Are Not American.
Still not American.
Oh, we are still not American. Yes, that's very important. But for us in the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies department, we appreciate her, know her, and love her best as our chair, our fearless leader, and the calm yet assertive energy we need to make all this happen. So we are very grateful for Lani leading this conversation. Please join me in welcoming Lani here.
Okay, we just clip. Okay. Well, aloha mai kako. Mahalo everybody for joining me today in what I hope to truly be a conversation with myself and Dr. Cynthia Franklin, but then also with everybody here to have lots of space and time to talk and explore the wonderful work that she's done here in the book, but also, as you know, within our community. So I will introduce you first. Dr. Cynthia Franklin is a professor of English here at UH Mānoa. She's author of Narrating Humanity, as you know. She's also author of a number of other renowned texts like Academic Lives, Memoir, Cultural Theory, and the University Today from 2009, a book that brings together feminist, post-colonial, critical race, and disability studies. In addition to that, her first book, Writing Women's Communities, looked at the work of feminist writers in the 1970s and 80s. She has a PhD from UC Berkeley and a BA from Stanford. She's an award-winning teacher, having won multiple teaching awards from us here. She regularly teaches courses on life writing, autobiographical writing, and cultural studies, and I see many students here, and if you've not taken a course with her, I highly suggest that you do. But more than all of this scholarly praise, for which she is very worthy, as many of you know, she is a fierce and beloved community organizer and advocate. She initiated the Hawaii Coalition for Justice in Palestine, which later became Students and Faculty for Justice in Palestine. She's been key in supporting the work of students and community members, especially during the most recent iteration of genocide taking place in Gaza. In short, she's worked endlessly when many could not to pursue justice and to uplift the voices often marginalized. So we're here today to talk story, to kuka, and learn from this luminous thinker and human. So let me give you Larry first. And did you see her shoes? You see her shoes?
I have the shoe fairy, and I took a picture of them before I came in here to say, I'm bringing you into the room. So
yes, okay. So, you know, a lot of what you talk about in this book is really heavy, obviously. And so what I hope to do when we talk today is to balance that also with some joy, if is possible, right? Because the joy and the space of coming together is also part of survival, right? And our humanity. So the way I approach things, I don't want it to seem like I'm making being too light about things, but I also want us to enjoy and celebrate what you've done here. So I'm saying that. So I'm going to ask a number of questions that may come from the perspective of maybe someone who doesn't know a lot about the process of writing a book like this one, the process of thinking through it, the kind of time it takes, especially since I see a number of students at kind of like different stages and how to start thinking about this kind of work. Okay, so like I said, I feel like I'm like giving the news or like this. What first brought you to life writing?
First of all, I want to thank you for your intro, and I want to thank Hei-Chin for this invitation and the departments and many of you in the room who are in the book or helped write it or both. So what brought me to life writing? I didn't know that I was doing life writing studies until actually Craig House told me I was. And I still think I come at it kind of slant, but I'm just interested in representations of life and of particular lives and the kind of work that that does in the world. And I think before I even knew there was a thing called life writing studies, that's what I was doing, was just looking at the power of representing lives and how that shapes our thinking, how that shapes the worlds that are possible for us to inhabit, how it creates violence also. And so it's been a kind of ongoing concern. And I think also thinking about representations of lives, not in an individual sense, but in a collective sense. So I've been interested in how people work together to change narratives about who, you know, what is a life, what is the story of a people, what is the story of a place, And so I think that my approach to life writing has always been kind of interested in collectivity and politics and movements.
That's so funny you mentioned that. I often think, like, when I was learning and a grad student, and then even as a junior faculty, and I was just writing about the things that were interesting to me, I didn't know like the names or the methods or the schools of thought I was even engaging in.
Yeah.
So that's just a way to say that it's great that you can have people can they tell you like, oh no, that's what that is. And you're building on it too, right? So then what does life writing like give us or teach us? You know what I mean?
Well, in the context of this particular project, I was just kind of interested in, you know, what are, when you tell a story of a life, how do you tell that story? And how does the way that you tell that story shape possibilities for other people? And how does it reflect, you know, the culture in which you live? And so, like, what makes a human worthwhile? Often it's that they have a family, that they have a job, that they are not poor, that they have made good for themselves. There are all these just kind of things that I would say are hallmarks of the human. And so I've been interested in stories that challenge that in some ways, and also in looking at how those kind of hallmarks of who or what counts as human can do a lot of violence in terms of determining who's not filling those. And then those lives become expendable. And so I think that for me, how lives are represented is very high stakes and is about, and also we read these stories, we view these stories, and they give us a sense of what's possible for ourselves. And so if the stories that say this is a worthwhile human don't include you,
right,
that's very consequential also,
right,
for yourself too.
Right. That reminds me of how, like, not to bring it back to the news, but when you watch the news or you consume things in media, right, and everything is very shaped in the particular politics of the media that's being created, and you get quote unquote human stories about people, what makes a good citizen, what makes us like good subjects worthy of rights. And so, you know, what you map in this book through the different chapters, looking at these different people and how they narrate themselves. How do you come into that as a writer and like decide kind of like whose stories to, you know, go further into?
That's a great question.
Okay, good.
And I have a kind of arbitrary answer. Or I don't know if it's arbitrary, but you know, I think you do what you know best and what you care most about. And so this book took a really long time to write. It had lots of different iterations and lots of different starting points. But the chapters, which are on Hurricane Katrina, Black Lives Matter, Mauna Kea, and Palestine kind of solidarity work, are just things that I had some personal connection to or stakes in. You know, for example, I have a chapter on that looks at Oscar Grant and Fruitvale Station as a film that was one of the initiating points for Black Lives Matter. And when Oscar Grant was killed early on New Year's Eve day, I was staying at my brother's house in Oakland, and my brother was on the board of directors for BART. And these phone calls started coming in, and, you know, I was following that very closely, and it's not in the book, right? Because I don't think that my brother would appreciate it. And also I don't have, you know, I didn't have permission to share some of the things I learned, but that was a kind of personal interest. And, you know, I think that the chapters on Palestine and Mauna Kea were just ones that kind of took shape after involvement. And so there could have been many different chapters, many different books, but I picked ones that were things I cared about. And then also I wanted to pick texts that I felt were important, either because they were culturally have a lot of attention paid to them. So Ta-Nehisi Coates's Between the World and Me is something that is taught across colleges. It's a required book in a lot of, kind of high school curriculum. And it's, been lauded as the start of, as a kind of BLM anthem. And it's not a book I like as much as the others, to be honest, but it's important. And so I picked it for that reason. Other texts I picked because I really liked them and I thought they were doing important work.
Just can I interrupt?
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, were there other books you were thinking about including other than the Ta-Nehisi Coates book
For that chapter?
Yeah, that
There's so many different possible texts for for BLM, and now I'm trying
Right.
to remember what I was oscillating between. But I think that there's the movie Selma, for example, is really kind of was important just in terms of more mainstream takes that are related to or in conversation with BLM. There is actually the movie Black Panther, I got kind of interested in as because it in some ways would have been a good companion piece to Fruitvale Station, since it's Ryan Coogler is the director for both of those. And one is, kind of very set in realism. It's the last 24 hours of Oscar Grant's life. And the other is an Afrofuturist film. It's, speculative. And so, what do these texts have in common and how are they in conversation with activism around BLM?
Sorry to interrupt.
No.
Before that.
No, not at all.
Well, so on this, picking up what you're saying about, like the choices you make on what to include, what text to analyze. I guess when you look at the different chapters, there's, you talk a little bit about, especially in the Palestine and the Mauna Kea chapter, your relationship to the authors you're writing about. And so I'm wondering how you kind of balance that kind of politics of representation, right? And, what you go through as a writer or a researcher as you maybe decide, like, okay, I'm going to write about this.
So I would just say it's scary.
I know, that's what
It's scary. I did my best to send drafts to everybody who is discussed, especially if it's not their published work. Some of you are in the room and I've asked you for, permission. And the chapter on Steve Salaita, that was scary.
Yeah.
And I wrote him and I was just like, I have this chapter. And I'm sending it. And you don't want to make, you don't want to put a burden on someone to read something, but you also don't want to put something into the world that's going to do harm.
Of course.
And that people aren't comfortable with. And he wrote back right away. He's like, I'll get to this immediately. And then I didn't hear it. I'm like, okay, what does this mean? I also know he's very outspoken. And if he had a problem, I would hear from him. And, he was just like, do whatever you want, say whatever you want. And really, I was anxious about it. I knew it was okay when I got a request from him to review his book that was in manuscript form.
Sure.
That was based on that. So I'm like, okay, it's okay.
Right.
But it is, it's one of the people who I care the most about are the people I send to in draft. And that, it feels important to not find out responses after something is set and out in the world.
Yeah.
But it is also, I think especially like, again, in the Mauna Kea chapter, that was not a chapter I planned to write. It was going to be, it was going to be a postscript.
Oh, okay.
And it was going to be a postscript because, I'm working on this book on the human, and Mauna Kea is happening, and it just bust open everything in the book. Because it's like, why am I looking at the category of the human at all? Why is that is the bounded thing? And I'm not questioning that. in the book as much as looking at how it's represented. And so it was going to be a postscript to kind of open things up. The editor that I was working with at Fordham, Richard Morrison, said, I want this to be a chapter. And again, I was a little apprehensive about writing that, and I took another year almost to do the book by trying to do that in the right kind of way. But it was also a chance, like I'm looking right at Noe and Aiko and people in this room whose stories were so powerful, who I learned so much from, and so it was also an opportunity to honor those stories and that work, which I hope I did.
So related to that, no, I mean, I think that you did. And so what's interesting about the Mauna Kea chapter, as you say, it's very ethnographic and autobiographical, right? Like it's happening. Many students and people that are here are involved. So like, I guess I'm trying to say, like, I have a comment about it, but I also have like questions about it. Like, so how do you, like, in many ways, the students that you're working with become these creators of this movement that's happening, right? And so what does that teach us, I guess, in a way, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I do hope that one of the things that comes through is that students were my teachers and are my teachers. And, I think that the postscript, for example, is really kind of centered on the art that's on the cover of this. And, Joy Enomoto is not a student of mine,
right?
But a movement person who I have a lot of respect for. And I asked her to create some art for the cover, and I was really happy with that. She said yes, and what she did, but also Kawila Mahi and Ihilani Lasconia, that last, kind of post, I can't remember if I called it a postscript, but it's about a song that they wrote that Kawila started when in my class. And that was a class that was looking at, kind of political organizing in relationship to life writing. So I was working on this book through that class, and those students in that class were my teachers. And also I just was so kind of blown away by the creativity of what people are producing. Aiko's work on thinking about decolonial love is something that essay has made me think so much about.
I love it. I've
ownership.
assigned it in multiple
I
classes.
assign that essay all
Me
the time.
too.
So, I think that was something that, I learned from. And so I think that part of that last section was to, kind of move away from books that maybe are, required curriculum books across the US, and to think what are the books that are actually changing our lives before they've reached that that point of maybe they'll be canonical, maybe they won't. Or canonical is a complicated word, but you know what I mean. And to look at texts that are in the midst of making things and giving us new ways to look at things. So that was a really exciting thing to do, and also just to kind of challenge these lines between not only teacher and student, but also researcher or like theorist and movement actor and writer, and to think about these as very, dynamic and overlapping categories.
I love that, because I mean, I say this and I feel this in teaching. Like, I learn so many things from students. Like, they have so much to teach us and give us that I think some faculty, none of the faculty in this room don't appreciate as much how much our students can shape our theories, and then as we kind of like grow and learn from them. So I really appreciated that. And then in the way that you're talking about it, it's like the writing or the thinking doesn't need to be fully formed all the time. And so students who are creating things in our classes could be just as valuable as some published book somewhere, right? there's so much, and then the creation that they're bringing forth, like the emergence that happens is just like so wonderful that it's like they don't get appreciated enough, I think.
Yeah, and I think, in the Mauna Kea chapter, I do cite from an undergraduate's essay.
That's right.
And he wrote this beautiful thing about stars. We were reading Land Simpson, and talking about constellations of co-resistance. And he wrote something, and I'm just like, this is just beautiful. And it's making me think about stars in a kind of poetic way in relation to, the movement for the Mauna. And so, I think just breaking down this idea of what is the subject of scholarship and what is worthy of being cited is something I was, kind of actively trying to work with.
Right, right. So then going back to the Mauna and how that kind of like opened up the discussion in the book, can you say a little bit more kind of in detail how the analysis coming out of the Mauna opened up the conversation about the human?
Sure. So I guess, I had been thinking about working within this category of the human and how people were dehumanized, were excised from that. And I think one of the things that happened as I was finishing this up was really, and this wasn't like it was new because I've been here a long time.
Right.
But this idea of the Mauna as a relation and as a sacred entity and a living, breathing thing, and the elements as living and breathing, that wasn't like something I hadn't heard, but I hadn't experienced it until I really got more immersed in that movement and started learning from people in a more intimate way. And that really just made me think about, kind of the need to think about humans in relation to water and in relation to rocks and in relation to mountains. And this is something that people in Indigenous studies and in Indigenous worlds have been doing in different particular ways, since time immemorial. And so I also, kind of just started doing more systematic reading about that and thinking about the fact that I had been working within ideas of the human that are colonial constructs, but there are lots of ways and lots of different parts of the world that are thinking about the human. Maybe they're calling it kwe, maybe they're not, maybe they're calling it people.
Right.
And then Glenn Coulthard's, kind of work on grounded normativity, like the idea that, well, this is normal and predates. It predates these colonial constructs, and it's driving forward politics that are situated in the present. So it's decolonial world making that is kind of based in forms of normativity that, are important and worth engaging. And so that's what I was, really kind of drawn to doing in that last chapter. And there are just ways that it really does, I think, put into a kind of crisis the other chapters.
Right. I want to shift gears a little bit and shift away from talking about Mauna Kea a little bit and think about the role of social media or like narratives that you're reading online and how that becomes a part of the book.
I mean, I think that is probably especially relevant to the Palestine chapter because, I think that that chapter is situated in the present tense, and so much of what is happening through social media. And in fact, one of the stories that really what inspired the whole book was a story of a Palestinian journalist for Al Jazeera, and I'm actually sorry that I'm blanking out on his name, but his son was killed in front of Al Shifa Hospital, which now is like obliterated. And there is a picture of him, and he's holding his child that's in a white shroud and surrounded by grieving people they are holding him up, and he is holding up his son. And I posted it on social media to say, to call for an end to defunding Israel.
Right.
And I think this was like in 2011. And I had these incredible responses from my friends, a Facebook friend who just said, this is just nonsense. It was, if Palestine, she didn't say Palestinians, and then cited Golda Meir, alleged, I don't know if Golda Meir actually said this, but it's attributed to her. If, when the Arabs love their children more than they hate us, we won't have to kill their children. And I'm just like, what the hell is this woman looking at? She's not looking at the same picture I'm looking at. And it's like this idea that a picture is 1,000 words. It's like, no, it's not. Clearly, it's a narrative in her head that's way more powerful than that. And, another friend stepped in and told us to be civil to each other. Right. Even though I had not been uncivil, and reminded me that she was a child therapist, which I found rather horrifying. But anyway, I think social media is a place where we are having these conversations. There is a lot of violence that's being done on social media, and it is making possible a lot of violence. And so I think that it is a place where, for example, right now, these understandings of Palestinians as animals, as terrorists, are, getting blasted across mainstream media, but perhaps more powerfully right now are contestations to that. And, so we see the ICJ putting social media postings in their case as part of their documentation of the genocide that is happening. And so you can kind of see the power of social media and the fact that millions of people are mobilizing through social media right now and saying, no, this is not, this, you all might be more powerful and have access to the New York Times and, these other, kind of media outlets, but there's a lot that's being done, I think, through social media that is important in terms of challenging those narratives and also providing support for people who feel that the world is letting them be genocided through live stream.
Lifetime. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad that you brought that up also, because social media, I think we need to get into social media, as violent as it is also this space of, can be this space of like accountability, this space of like radical care and connectivity to. In my class the other day, my students are here, we had to like make a queer utopia. And in my queer utopia, I wanted to like get rid of Wi-Fi and phones that you could take pictures on or go on the internet on or anything, like just give me a regular phone. And then I wanted to like cancel all social media, just like it erased. And they were horrified by this. And I was very serious about it, but also, I do recognize, I understand, as you just said, like the way that it can work on both ends. And then also be this space, especially as we see in the Mauna Kea chapter, of this place to mobilize, right? Like overnight, all these people show up. Overnight, you shift the narrative within a community through this vexed platform. Yeah,
it is a vexed platform.
It really is.
I mean, I think in the chapter that is on Stephen Salaita, the kind of attacks that he has been subjected to through social media are just, they're horrific. Regular death threats, memes calling him a Nazi, just, endless streams of disgusting, hateful speech. And, even if you can say, I don't respect these people,
right?
It's not like it's a pleasant experience to be subjected to that.
Yeah.
And also it can result in a firing.
Yeah, so I was a lecturer at Urbana-Champaign actually when they hired him. And the Native Studies faculty at the time were very excited to hire him and think more broadly about Indigenous studies, right, from a global perspective. And so it was just really maddening to see what happened the year after when he was supposed to begin, and the whole thing just fell apart. But then also in that chapter, as you discuss, you know, all of these terrible things that have occurred, and then he is able to find joy, you know, driving the school bus, spending time with his son, connecting with children, and then having space to, you know, write another story or something, right? And so kind of like, to me, like illustrating like the different way a scholar's life can be, even if the terms under which that is occurring was through this very terrible thing that represents a lot of things that are wrong with universities today, as we know.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, for people that, do people know who Stephen Salaita is? I know some of you do, but does anyone not know who he is? I would expect some of you do not.
Maybe give it like a little bit.
Well, during 2014, when there was the Israel siege on Gaza, that seemed like the worst yet. Who knew what would happen in 2023? He issued some tweets that were extremely critical of Israel and also of the world's complicity in what was happening. And so he had some that were particularly viewed as incendiary. One of them said, if Netanyahu appeared on, you know, television wearing a necklace of teeth made of children's teeth, would anybody be surprised? And people took that to be horribly anti-Semitic. He also had a tweet about wishing that the settlers in Hebron would go missing. And the settlers in Hebron who had been missing turned up dead, which happened before, I mean, after his tweet. But, you know, I think the context for that is that Hebron settlers are incredibly violent. They live literally on top of Palestinians who cannot use their front doors, who cannot walk on sides of the street that aren't portioned off for them. There's no Jewish Israeli living in Hebron who is in any way not directly implicated in horrible violence. And anyway, so these tweets caused enough uproar that he was fired from the tenured position he had just been hired into. And he then proceeded to get fired again from a position at the American University in Beirut, in both cases with congressional interference, helping to get him fired. So it went all the way into the Congress, the US Congress, to get him fired. And so anyway, that's a little bit of background on who he is, but I think that he then turned to driving a school bus for children. And one of the things that he also did was started a website where he published long form essays. And this was my long-winded way of getting to what you were saying about, you know, the pros and cons of what can happen on the internet, because there is a kind of freedom in being able to publish what you want without any oversight of editors or, you know, restrictions of length. His essays are weird lengths. They're too long for, you know, they're not long enough for journals or too long for, you know, shorter pieces. He can do whatever length he wants. He can say what he wants. And so there is a kind of freedom there.
Kind of like circling back to Mauna Kea a little bit is, what's it like to write about a movement as it's happening?
Oh, that's a funny question.
Oh, I don't know.
No, it's not funny. It's just funny because I don't know the answer to it.
Right, I know.
It's like,
sorry.
No. It's challenging, right?
Yeah.
And you know you're going to make mistakes because things you say now, 3 weeks later, you might think, why did I say that?
Right.
Because the terrain is shifting. So I think it is very challenging. And I think that also, you know, it's challenging, but it's also, if you're in the middle of something, you care about it. And so that's very energizing too.
I'm going to ask maybe 2 more questions. This is my last, maybe second to last, because I want to give people space. Do you consider this a feminist text?
I do.
Serious.
And I mean, it's a good question because it's not like I'm talking a lot about gender or even sexuality in this book. But I think that I hope that the kind of methodology and ethos of it it's definitely informed by my grounding in feminist theory and identification as a feminist in terms of kind of putting forward more collective understandings and workings together, and challenging of different kinds of masculine individualism and formations that are completely grounded in heteropatriarchy and in kind of gendered and sexual norms. So I hope so.
I think it is. I'm not,
I mean, it is, but it's true that it's not, that's not the overt kind of
no, I mean,
discussion in it.
I think that it is a feminist text, and this is something I would, explain to students. It's like you can have a text that has a feminist ethos, as you say, that is like grounded in feminist values, I think, that doesn't need to have like woman or gender in the title, right? It's this coming from this space and hoping to do feminist work that challenges heteropatriarchy and a number of other things. Say, okay, my final question. So the current moment, everything happening in Palestine and the contestations and the violence and the genocide, how are questions of the human at the center of it?
I actually just wrote a small piece for this publication Against the Current, thinking about some of that, because I really have been struck by how many recourses there have been to calling Palestinians animals, cockroaches, dogs, snakes. And this is something that has been going on for not forever, but for decades as a justification for genocide. And one of the things that has struck me about this is not only is it very dehumanizing of Palestinians, but who treats animals this way, right? I mean, who does this to animals? And they are doing it to animals too, by the way, and so it's in some ways this last chapter about like, why are humans held up as the primary reference point? And also, animals are often used as an index of humanity, and Israel actually does that too. They boast of being a vegan army, and that gives them this moral superiority, and they have boasted of rescuing pets out of Gaza, which is really obscene given the fact that you can actually see these animals are terrorized as well. But also just this idea of, like, oh, so if these are animals, this is okay. And so what happens if you start thinking that everything is connected? Because what's happening is also just horrific in terms of what it is doing to the earth. And, the kinds of the carbon footprint of this is, it's like 40 countries worth in the last few months. And also just, the kinds of pollutions of water and air. And then also ways that Palestinians, I think, have been using social media pretty deliberately in many cases to show care for animals as a kind of, response to the horrific violence that Israel is enacting upon animals and humans and all of life forms in Gaza right now. And I think there's been a very savvy but also sincere insistence on people caring for cats and dogs, and Refat Al-Arir, before he was assassinated, was I can't remember if it was Al Jazeera or CNN. It was Al Jazeera, I think, went through the zoo pointing to these because he did volunteer work there. And these animals were terrorized. And that, I think there was both a concern for these animals, but also like, here's the most moral army on earth. And this is what's happening, not only to humans, but to animals.
Okay. Thank you. I think we can open it up. I know you've had to talk a lot.
No, thank
So,
you for all those really good questions.
okay. Anybody have comments, questions, praise? Happy to open it up. I'll facilitate. Brandy.
Mahalo. Mahalo to you, Cynthia, for this talk and for your beautiful book. And mahalo to you for your beautiful. I had a question. So, what does solidarity look based on everything that really teach us about what it means to have human connections? And what are the things that maybe perhaps even need to be in place for us to continue to do something?
Thank you for that question. Because it's one I think about a lot. And, I think that there are, kind of different models of solidarity. Some are, well, we have the same thing, so we're in this together. Or if I do this for you, you'll do this for me. And so that kind of transactional model of solidarity. And then there's like the corporate model of solidarity that has happened since like BLM of like, Pepsi saying solidarity with whatever and buy our drink, or university presidents saying solidarity. Those are, so we have that kind of co-optation of solidarity. But I think the model of solidarity I'm most interested in this book that I think also challenges some of these violent understandings of the human have to do with forms of kinship and sharing stories. And I think there has to be, friendships to have lasting solidarities. It's different than a coalition, which is, a kind of like strategic thing. So I don't think of solidarity as strategic. I think of it as something that is a practice that requires friendship and love and sharing stories, and making space and taking those things seriously so that it is not just coming together to do an action or to get something passed. But I think for solidarity to be meaningful, it has to be a practice, and there has to be attention to the relations among the different people, so that if you're working together and your internal politics aren't sound, then your work in the world is not going to be sound. And so I think it's really trying to make a space for relationships that are premised on radical forms of care and connectivity, and that would go to the feminist, I think, impetus in the book. Does that answer?
Yeah, that's good.
Hi.
I'm Rachel.
Hi, Rachel.
I'm a PhD candidate in the sociology department. And I really enjoyed your point about citing texts that are more, I don't want to say untraditional, but not maybe recognized as much in academic and other spaces. And I kind of struggle with that as a graduate student who's progressing, forward and pushing forward my own scholarship and thinking about what I want to cite, especially that I work in Global South spaces. And so it's an interesting tension, because to lend myself credibility and legitimate my work, right? Like I need to cite these established texts that are maybe outdated, maybe, I don't know, maybe they're evergreen, but usually they're pretty outdated. And so I just would love to pick your brain a little bit about, how do you lend credibility to these texts that are in formation or newly published? And I guess, how would you advise junior scholars to do the same?
That's such a good and hard question, because I feel like I have the freedom to cite how I want to cite. And you probably don't have that same freedom. And I actually, as you were speaking, was flashing back to when I started the PhD program that I was in at UC Berkeley. We had to pick a text that we were going to be with all semester. and I'm going to date myself here, and I picked Toni Morrison's Beloved, and I was told, you can't pick this book. What's this book? And now I'm like, ha ha ha. But I actually wasn't allowed to use that book. And so, you know, I was cut off from using that book. And I think there are ways that, you know, kind of there's a politics of citation all the time. And I would just say the fact that you're thinking about this is really great. And that there aren't always easy answers to it. I was talking with some friends who have been working on an academic boycott resolution for the Modern Language Association. And I worked on a campaign for that several years ago. And we put together like a 55-page report or so. And we were very careful to cite like the New York Times and the Guardian and, you know, Israeli Jewish scholars. And it was deliberate. And now this iteration, you know, it's like, no, it's going to be Palestinian scholars. And, you know, like at the time that was like, we won't be listened to, you know? And so I think as a junior scholar, I would just say, I would encourage you to be bold and do work that you can stand behind and to claim your methodology. So that instead of just, you know, to kind of say, I am citing these people for these reasons, and to claim that as a methodology and as a theoretical intervention and to stand behind it and then realize some people won't like it. But I think there is more space to be able to do that kind of work. And I think it's really important. We were just reading Kevin Kwashi's Black Aliveness in my graduate class this week. And there are just massive footnotes. It's really interesting because the introduction is like 30 pages and 15 pages of it is footnotes, which is really unfashionable these days. Like you're told footnotes are expensive, people don't read them. And there's a whole, I think, kind of theoretical intervention that he's making there and an insistence on an intellectual genealogy of Black feminist thinkers and Black queer thinkers are in those footnotes. And so I think that, you know, to the way that you're being mindful about that, I think is great. And then just, I would say, claim it and make a case for it. Yeah, it is a good question. Yeah. And I also say, also show you know your stuff with the, you know, the expected people in your field.
Thank you, Cindy. And I really appreciate Lani's description of you as a luminous human being. And to go further, you know, to what you pointed out in your chapter, just a luminous being about Mauna Kea. I just really thank you for weaving these various struggles together. And as someone whose child is represented also in the book, I am grateful that the future generations of Kanaka and others who have been part of these struggles can see themselves and our destinies and our struggles as intertwined. And I just really am grateful for the way that you have braided us together. So thank you so much.
Yeah. My favorite picture in the book is of Noe's daughter and the Mauna leaders. These daughters are all lined up. And I don't know, Noe, if I've told you the story, but it's one of my favorite moments of being on Mauna Kea because Jason Momoa was there that day. And this pack of girls was running around and then like they didn't get to meet him. And they were, but one of, you know, I think it was Andre's daughter got to meet him, and they were really disappointed. And I'm like, you guys are so much more badass than Jason Momoa. I'm sorry, but like, you are the ones. And they're just looking at me like, are you kidding? This is such a dorky adult thing to say. We just really want to meet Jason Momoa. It was very sweet, but but I was just like, these girls are going to be, who knows what these girls are going to be doing because of their mamas and their dads.
With that, everybody was getting excited because Jason were coming towards and Robert Casanero was singing the Mauna Kea like live, and I mean, it was so powerful, and I was like, who the hell cares about Jason?
I went and I'm like, I'm going to go like dish lunch out in the kitchen line because I'm not interested in Jason Momoa, which is, I'm not saying as a virtuous thing. Like, I really just didn't really know who he was. And Shankar was there and I was like, is that Jason Momoa in the line for food? And it was not. So anyway, thank you for that.
Thank you, Cynthia, for the book and, sort of being a walking companion while you were writing this book has been enormous. So I met Cindy, frankly, when I first came here in 2002. And at that time, she was working on Academic Lives. And, she immediately invited me very generously to our writing group. And I was most ungenerous, but I joined it and then, immediately started to tear down and critique. But when
it's true, she did. I remember this very well.
Stuff, and I was like, English people write like this? It was kind of like an eye opener for me that they can write these things that seem very, politically engaged, not just about text, but about actually the work that these texts are doing in the world, and talking about anti-racism, talking about, Black feminists and, feminists of color. So that ethos is, of course, very much part of your book. So I wanted to ask two things. One is that I have actually very much benefited from that social movement question that, Lani asked, which was, we've talked about the ways in which when we write about social movement, we're not doing that to ossify these movements, but to capture a particular moment. So if you could talk a little bit more about those of us, so as to, sort of share your manao with those of us who write about social movements. And also, like everything that you have written, there's always a personal point of entry. And I really so appreciate that. And can you talk about that craft? Because it requires a certain kind of craft to do that and to sustain it throughout your narrative.
Thanks. The social movement part, I mean, I have something in the introduction at the end of it, where, and this because Monisha was like one of, along with many others in this room, helped so much with the writing of this. But I say to write about contemporary movements and moments is to write against time, to produce work that can be read as dated rather than historical. And so that is a kind of challenge. And I think part of it is about welcoming being dated, or, like capturing a moment. And I think one of the things that that I am really trying to underline in here is you don't arrive at, oh, here's the way to be human, here's the way to act in the world, that it's always going to be in movement, and to really get at the verb part of human being as a process of becoming. And so to just not be trying to offer the end, the final thing, the point of arrival. But then but at the same time, there are just difficulties about it, because you can kind of, well, I'll give an example, which was writing about Patrisse Cullors' When They Call You a Terrorist. And I wrote this chapter, and then I was revising other chapters, and then all this stuff broke about Patrisse Cullors. And, I was just like, what do I do? There were charges against her that were from the far right that really were about Black women owning property just being something that, was very threatening to white people. and just like challenging that. But there were also some critiques from the left that I felt were challenging to some of the things that I had said and held up. And I had to kind of go back and think about, you know, the difficulties that posed, and not to walk back the readings, but to also kind of think about ways that, what does it mean, like if you're in a movement that all of a sudden hits the mainstream big time? Because one of the things that happened to Patrisse Cullors in 2021 is that all of a sudden millions of dollars flooded in to, you know, the Black Lives Matter global network, and dealing with like a fraction of that right now through Students and Faculty for Justice in Palestine, where we have some money for the first time. And I'm just like, I don't know how to make an Excel sheet. Like, I don't know how to do this. And, you know, like, I can't imagine what it would be like to all of a sudden have millions of dollars when you're used to really, and it's work to spend money. It's hard to keep track of it. And so, you know, I think that that was just like one of those moments, as you know, because we talked about this. What am I going to do about Patrisse Cullors? So I think it is a challenge at the same time as, you know, insisting on that this isn't about individual greatness as much as it is about, you know, how movements get made. And then the part about personal writing is again something that I tried consciously to do more as I got deeper into this book, but it's also like, how do you not center yourself in ways that are like making the story about you, but how do you also, you know, I don't know. It's just, it's something that I think is hard to do, but I also felt that I needed to locate myself in relation to the material, especially in that last chapter on Mauna Kea, and to try and do that as a settler. And actually Noe's Kuleana Circle was in my head the whole time I was writing that chapter. And I don't know if I did this exercise that Noe led, where everybody stood together, and it's like, if you have this kind of connection to Aina, take a step forward. If you don't, you know, and pretty soon you're in these concentric circles. And that was a guiding idea for me through that whole chapter. Where am I in the Kuleana circle, and what is my Kuleana, and how do I be honest about where I am in that? Which also means some things are not for sharing in a book that, you know.
Any other comments, questions?
Kind of related to your answer just now, could you share with us the process of coming to Hawaii and learning about the traumas and the experiences here, and including it in your work as someone who is not from Hawaii? And this goes to like other Kanaka professors and people. If you could give any advice to PhD students or graduate students to learn more about Hawaii and kind of like incorporate what we've already learned about race, gender studies into the problems that people go through here.
I'm going to say a little bit, and then I'm going to turn it over to Lani. Just to, when I came here, I had my college roommate was from Hawaii. Her boyfriend was from Hawaii. All the Hawaii people hung out together. So it wasn't like, you know, I didn't have just the stereotyped understandings of it. I knew enough for my job visit to read Haunani K. Trask's From a Native Daughter on the plane ride on the way over. And so, but I also felt like I had a huge learning curve. And I think for me, it goes back to that Kuleana circle and just trying to do a lot of listening for a long time. But I think in terms of what to read and so on, can I turn this to you? Because I feel like you know, we have all these expert, I read these people in the room. Read Lonnie.
I
You
would
know,
say that, you know, I can definitely see how it'd be hard for a student to come here and not, you know, not necessarily know of the particular like issues that are part of Hawaii and the racial issues and the indigenous issues that are here. I do know that there are some offices on campus that have trainings about this that can be accessed by students as well as faculty. I would read Haunani K. Trask's From a Native Daughter. If you're not familiar with it, that would be like the first thing to read. But then after that, I would read Asian Settler Colonialism in Hawaii, the book. I would read that. I would read A Nation Rising by Nohelani Goodyear and other
poetry
wonderful
by
folks.
Brandy.
Poetry by Brandy Nalani McDougall. That can,
Lonnie's book.
as well.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
But since you are an English PhD student and this will be interesting to you, I would suggest to go through those texts and see what you can learn from it. And then I think the biggest thing, and I would tell all students from elsewhere to learn this, is just like learn your place, right? Have an awareness of yourself in a different place, which I think is valuable for like personal development generally, but just to learn your place, figure out what that means, give yourself space to reflect on that. You don't have to be hard on yourself or whatever, but just understand that who you are and how you move through this place may be very different from the people who are from here. And that you really need to take stock of that, I think. And especially as graduate students, you know, you're coming with different work that you're here to do, and just to understand that as you go through it. Yeah, and I would suggest taking a Olelo Hawaii class. Yeah. Anybody want to add to that?
Can I ask like people to raise their hands who are Kanaka who have written books in this room? Because like I'm also looking at Tiana right
Oh yeah,
there.
Tiana.
Now no one's raising their hand.
Yeah, I know. We can call them out. Yeah. I think I did actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Any other questions, comments? Do you?
I really loved your book. I just came through a little bit, and well, because I'm also interested in human and how human narrates their stories. It was so fascinating. But I was wondering, I wanted to, and what I liked about your point was you said some kind of some post-humanism theories kind of leave out what real people, real humans' lives are going on like that. So I want to listen more a little bit about it. So what kind of personal moments did you felt that this theory is some kind of might is not really dealing with what our real lives are, and how do you think about human and inhuman binary? Because what post-human theories are, what they pursue is kind of really destructuring those binary, and I wanted to hear a little bit more about what your thoughts about it. Thank you.
Thank you. I did, you know, I talked a little bit in the intro about how I think a lot of post-humanism jumps over the human by just thinking about like the human as one homogenous category, and then not looking at colonialism, not looking at racial capitalism, not looking at, you know, kind of heteropatriarchy, all these things that mean the human is not just one category. And so I, you know, back to the Rachel's question about like who you cite, I was pretty deliberately not engaging that work, besides just saying that, you know, I kind of lumped it together and said there's a jumping over of the human that's a little too, you know, it's too fast. And I think that I I did a kind of similar thing, I think, with life writing theory, which I feel like doesn't always attend to representations of lives in these kind of collective ways of like of a people or of a movement. So in terms of personal experiences, I think one of the things that I was really kind of interested in is how are movements that are in the making posing challenges and alternatives to these understandings of the human that are posited as obvious or as uniform under post-humanism, or as, you know, the kind of colonial constructs that have been critiqued by people like Sylvia Wynter and Walter Mignolo, or people who have really paid attention to the human as a genre of being that is a violently constructed one. And so just trying to learn from people that are engaged in these, you know, kind of life and death struggles, to not to say I'm human, but to say your way of being human sucks, because that's a different thing. And I think one of the things I appreciate about, you know, people who are engaged in a lot of the Palestine work, as well as some strains of BLM and Mauna Kea, is not like, oh, we want into that club, recognize us. And it's like, no, you know, instead it's like, let's do this differently, or we've always been doing this differently, and we're just going to keep doing this differently and change the world. Does that answer your question?
Any other questions?
No, I would just add to that, it's Cindy, the book, I think in the introduction, but also about the book, you make a case for the humanities, which is totally under attack. So I don't know if you want to say something about that.
It is under attack, and I feel like all of us in this room who care about critical thinking and education and having a university should be very worried right now about what is going to happen with, you know, the next president. It always seems like the next president can't be worse, and then they are. And all
the university or
the university. Oh, thank you for that too. But I think there is, like, also those of you who are students, you know, to think about student government and the role that you can play. When I was relatively new here, Haunani K. Trask mentored undergrad and graduate students who took over ASUH and GSO and ASUH, and they got rid of a really bad president, President Mortimer, who was called the Axeman because he was cutting everything. And they also got Porteous Hall renamed to Saunders Hall. They also had a lot to do with tuition waivers. So, you know, I think that the humanities is really under attack, and, you know, and not only is it under attack, but it is tied to militarization of this university, to corporatization of this university. And so I think we all need to be fighting not only for the humanities, but against these kind of movements that are, I think, eroding our education and our working conditions and everything else. I don't know if anyone else wants to add to that, but I think we're at a really depressing moment in time right now, but also one where we need to mobilize, run for ASUH and GSO.
Yeah.
Against the ROTC platform that's forming. Have you heard?
Well, I want to add to that and actually thank you, because coming here as a newer faculty, seeing faculty that are not afraid to say certain things about the university as well has been really valuable too. So I want to recognize that, and other folks in the room who do that, and how valuable that is for all of us to observe. So thank you. I'm gonna kind of wrap us up. You're welcome to come and talk to Cindy a little bit, have a little more snacks. Do we have to leave the room? I don't think so. Okay, because they keep opening the door.
We have a seminar.
No, but I mean, like, not that, like, there's just like students opening the door, but they're not involved. Okay, yeah, so we can stay, hang out. Yeah, so mahalo everybody for coming. Thank you. Thank you. With us. Have a good weekend.
Don't forget to buy a book in the back.
Yes.
$25. And please help yourself to snacks before you go. Thank you all.
Mahalo.